Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. And you may notice, Alex, we've already hit 2000 elo. Yeah, last video we achieved 2000 elo. However, I think I want to continue the series going for a little bit longer, see how we can do at this sort of rating level. Please let me know what you think down in the comments below of this decision, whether you want to see other things or maybe you're on board with the decision, but things will get significantly harder, most likely. So, we're against the Caro Kann, and obviously as you can see by my name, and if you've seen my channel before, you'll know I love the Caro Kann. Recently, I have been playing the Panov Attack against the Caro Kann, and I genuinely believe that this is the best way and most, not aggressive, but most testing way to face the Caro Kann defense. Because this kind of, like the whole point of the Caro Kann, I play the Caro Kann, I know this, right? The whole point is to set up this uber solid pawn structure, and white most of the time plays e5, and you move your pieces around your insanely solid structure in the center. You'll probably put this pawn on e6 at some point. But what the Panov attack does is it completely takes away that possibility for black. And black really has a difficult time playing normal Caro Kann ideas, because white launches one pawn at the black center and then launches a second pawn at the black center, basically making it impossible for black to hold a monopoly over the light squares, which is often what happens in the Caro Kann. So, we'll see what happens. My opponent goes bishop b4, and this is not a line that I recognize. Admittedly, I'm not like 100% familiar with the Panov just yet. I'm still learning many parts of it, but it feels like a very intuitive opening. I like a lot of these bishop g5 lines for the white pieces. I feel like putting pressure on this knight is always a good thing, because as I said before, to me, the Panov is about fighting for the light squares. So by pinning this knight, I'm using my dark squared bishop to fight for the light squares, because this tension between the pawns is a very important part of the Panov. So, okay. I think I want to allow my opponent to take me here. I don't think I want to take him. I just want to get castled. I can decide what I want to do with my queen. Maybe put it on her on c2, maybe b3. Maybe I'll advance c5 at some point, but we'll see. The Panov is a strange one, where there's there's tension between the center pawns, somewhat like the Queen's Gambit, and neither side really wants to be the one to take. Now, in this position, black could justify taking, which he does, by saying, okay, I've made you move your light squared bishop twice, which is a concession, of course. However, I get my bishop to the c4 square, which is just an objectively good square for the bishop to be on, fighting for the d5 square. I can also put the queen on b3, supporting the bishop and attacking the other bishop at some point. And d4 is an isolated pawn, sure. However, black isn't, I don't believe, that well equipped to deal with it at the moment. Firstly, of course, you have to watch for, okay, can black win the d-pawn? Well, no. It's defended twice, it's only attacked once, and this queen has other duties anyway, so really it's not being attacked whatsoever. e5 also can't be played because I have too strong a grip over that square. So, alright, that's nice and easy. He goes knight c6 to apply more pressure, and I think we can just go ahead and castle. There's also no bishop to g4 because my opponent played the move e6, which is a concession from my opponent. And then the other thing you have to look for in these isolated pawn positions, by the way, my knight is now no longer pinned, so there's ideas of knight to e4 putting pressure on this knight potentially. The other thing you have to look for is, does your opponent control the square in front of the isolated pawn? Well, in this position, my opponent controls it 3 times, but imagine I were to take this knight, the queen would most likely take back, because you don't want to ruin the pawn structure. And then d5 is only protected, well, once. So for the moment, it's technically defended 3 times, but I have a way to ensure that it's only defended once for a trade, right? So if I absolutely need to, there are potentially lines where I can advance the pawn, even immediately, because of the pin on the knight. and liquidate the position using the advancement of the pawn, liquidate my weak pawn. Now, I don't want to do that because this is actually quite a good asset. My opponent goes h6. Of course, we're going to drop the bishop back. I have no intention of taking for no reason. And as long as we don't lose this pawn and we keep playing around this pawn, we should hopefully be able to conjure up some kind of advantage. And I think hopefully I can demonstrate in this video, and maybe even already, why this is such a good weapon against the Caro Kann. I mean, one of the main ideas of the Caro Kann, all the way back here, is to get the bishop out somewhere and then play e6 to close up the pawn chain, right, as opposed to the French defense. But what a lot of people do is play an early e6, which I used to play myself and actually stopped playing because I felt it was so bad for black. So this bishop kind of struggles to do anything. Now, my opponent plays a6, which I assume is intended to play b5 and bishop to b7, which is a good alternative route for the bishop to go. We could play a3 and ask the bishop what it's going to do. I would guess it probably drops back to e7 to unpin the knight, so I'm not sure I want to encourage that. We could consider moves like knight to e5, applying pressure to the knight. And this can't be taken, really, because after takes, you have to go g5 to avoid losing the knight. Also seems a little bit unnecessary, though, because maybe my opponent can take on d4, which, you know, I obviously don't want to allow. I can also play the move knight to e4, getting out the way of this bishop and applying pressure to this knight. If knight e4, bishop e7 is probably forced. Seems like the only reasonable move. Then I'm not so sure what I want to do. I don't really want to take because I don't want to liquidate the position. So I think I'll leave my knight where it is for now. I think I like the look of the move a4, just stopping b5. Now, I think my opponent will most likely play b6. And still try and fianchetto the light squared bishop because it kind of sucks. But we take a bit of space and we make sure that b5 does not come with tempo. Because if I were to have done something else and b5 happened, I'd have to move the bishop anyway before I could continue with my other moves. So a4 just prevents that. So if b6 is played, it doesn't come with tempo, meaning I can do something else. And my opponent goes bishop to e7 without even being prompted, which is, you know, good. It's good. Okay. Part of me wants to go bishop g3 and just say, okay, I'm not interested in this diagonal anymore. I think better is probably a move like rook to e1. I also like the look of the move queen d2, preparing to bring, well, one of the rooks to the d file to overprotect the d pawn, which does look like a good idea. Maybe I had options to go d5, but I don't think so. I think all it does is open up the bishop, so it'll be very interesting to look over this with the engine, because, you know, I do have to admit, I'm not 100% familiar with these positions, but I think it does look very comfortable. I think it looks very comfortable. If queen d2, knight e4, bishop h4, knight h4, queen h4, it's an interesting idea. Not sure if that's actually good for me. Yeah, this pawn I do have to make sure it's protected. Maybe it's better to go queen d3, but then I'm a little bit concerned about knight b4, which I don't like. Maybe that's why my opponent played bishop back to e7 as well, to try and bring the knight into b4 in some lines. Not entirely sure. Knight e5 wouldn't be ridiculous going for this trade and basically trying to suffocate the black position, even for the cost of a queen trade. That's not a ridiculous idea. However, on knight e5, bishop d7, I don't really want to take the bishop. It's not a very impressive piece. I don't really want it. So, okay. What else can we do? What else can we do? Well, queen b3 just walks into knight to a5, so of course we don't want to do that. I like my light squared bishop. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. The channel is growing at an insane rate right now, so thank you all very, very much. I think rook e1 is the move I'm going to go for. Just bringing the rook to the e-file. There's a few things on the e-file. The e5 square could also be important in the future, so I don't think this can be a bad move. Also, yes, this also prepares queen to d2, because on knight to e4, I can just take with the rook, and then the bishop is defended. So, okay, yeah, rook e1 is actually a very good move. Like I've said in so many different videos before, if you put your pieces on active squares, typically tactics will work out in your favor. The rook is active on e1, and knight to e4 no longer works to secure trades of pieces, simply because my pieces are active. Obviously, after queen to d2, the point being my queen is under attack. Although, I don't know, maybe if queen d2, knight to e4, I can... No, I can't, really. Because after take with check, and my pawn structure's ruined, and I probably lose my d-pawn as well. So no, I think this is the best line to go for. Because I want to prepare queen to d2, just bringing the queen up and onto a better square, and preparing to bring my other rook to d1, because these are very important files. And what we will hopefully get in this game is kind of... we have an isolated pawn situation, sure, but we have more space as a result of having the isolated pawn, because it's far advanced up the board and it's restricting the black position. This e-pawn can't move to allow this bishop out. My a-pawn is also advanced up the position, trying to restrict the b-pawn to try and stop this bishop from getting out, right? So that's kind of the way that you should try to play isolated pawn positions in general. And, you know, kind of the principles that I'm applying to this game to try and grind some sort of advantage from this position. And my opponent is defending well, but we should have some kind of inherent advantage from our space, even though we have the isolated queen pawn. I want to play like queen d2, rook a to d1, and just have an incredibly active setup, from which situation, hopefully tactics should start to flow in our direction. It's also worth considering the long-term plans for this bishop. I mean, obviously, my opponent's light-squared bishop isn't really partaking in the game. It could get into the game later on, sure, but it's certainly one of his worst pieces. And my light-squared bishop has the potential to be a very active piece in this position, particularly because my d-pawn is on a dark square, so my light-squared bishop can work around the pawn. The question kind of is, do I want my bishop on this diagonal, or do I want my bishop on this diagonal? Now, I don't think it's necessarily that important. I mean, you could argue being on this diagonal does a good job at restricting e5 ideas, because you just open up my bishop. But also, e5 is restricted heavily anyway, and I could even drop my bishop back to g3 to get even more control over the e5 square if I really wanted to. So you could argue my bishop is kind of biting on nothing right now. Okay, knight to d5. Interesting. Okay, I see the point. So if bishop takes, I think this knight is going to take and support the knight in the center. Of course, if bishop takes and queen takes, then I can just take here and you can't take because I win your queen. Not to mention I would win a pawn anyway. So, I'm inclined to just bring my bishop back and say, okay, that's a cool knight, but I don't care, basically. If you take me, fantastic. I'll bring my b-pawn to c3, then my d-pawn is defended forever, and there I should have a relatively significant advantage, because my d-pawn is very well protected, and it means that my pieces that are currently defending my d-pawn can go off and do something else, because they're not required in the defense. I can maybe even set up some kind of battery to go after the black king. You could also argue that moving the knight away from f6 weakens the light squares around the king. Now, what I think my opponent may be planning is bishop to f6. trying to, like, vacate the f6 square, like, get the knight off of the f6 square, and then put the bishop on the f6 square, which admittedly is a relatively active square looking at the d4 pawn. However, I think there's many ways we can deal with that. I mean, bishop to f6 can easily just be met with knight to e4, and there is no way my opponent wants to allow this trade, because with the center being relatively open as it is, and my opponent having a fair few pawns on light squares, my dark square bishop will be ridiculously strong if I trade this off for one of my knights. So likely my opponent won't want to allow that. So bishop f6, knight e4 is probably a very good move. Now, if you take and then go bishop to f6, then bishop to f6 isn't all that good, because the d pawn is defended by the c pawn, and it's biting on nothing, right? Kind of like my bishop was. So that's also good. There's no tactics with, like, discoveries against this bishop because it's protected too many times. Like, for example, take. I can't, like, take and be up a pawn, because the knight will just take and I'll be down the exchange there. So the bishop isn't particularly vulnerable. He could put the bishop on d6 and try to challenge our bishop. However, does that work? Bishop d6. I was thinking I could take the knight. I suppose I probably could. If pawn takes... something like bishop to b3, bishop here, pawn take, bishop here. The only thing is, I'm not sure that I want to allow the e-pawn to take on d5 and allow this bishop out. Okay, my opponent goes knight c2, b4, defending the knight. I also don't have a3 kicking the knight away, so I kind of just have to leave it there for the time being. Which is a little bit annoying, but okay, we'll get on with it. We could take space with knight to e5 and just put our knight on an aggressive square, which looks like a relatively good idea. I think I like that, to be honest. If knight here, bishop to f6, well, I don't have to be concerned. Yeah, let's do this. This move doesn't actually pose any kind of threat. Like, you're not threatening to invade in any sort of sense. The only thing I have to be a little bit careful of is knight to e5 no longer defends the d-pawn. Now, currently it's attacked a grand total of 0 times, but of course the queen could be unleashed with a move like knight to b6 hitting the bishop. However, you know, knight b6, I'll probably just go bishop to b3, and then this is defended just fine. Also, knight e5 is decent because bishop to f6 no longer hits the d-pawn because my knight is in the way, so that's also useful. Supported very well by the rook and the bishop. Which is just decent. It's just decent. We could even consider bringing this knight to e4 at an opportune moment. We could even consider a move like f4, trying to lock this knight in place. Although weakening this diagonal seems a bit foolish, considering my d-pawn is an isolated pawn. I could even bring my rook to c1 in some scenarios, because it doesn't need to be on a1. Okay. Oh, I suppose my opponent... Well, knight c6 is very much in the air. This... Very much in the air. Of course, it's currently being defended by this knight. Now, what happens if I take on d5 first? Well, if I take on d5, black has two options. If black takes with the knight, then I can go knight to c6 and win the bishop pair, which looks very good. If I take on d5 and my opponent takes with the pawn, meaning his knight maintains defense of c6, I'll have to move my bishop. So let's say bishop to b3. And then, like, bishop to f5. It's an okay position. It's not a terrible idea. Not a terrible idea. Is there anything better? Like, can we start to turn our attention towards the king side, maybe? That wouldn't be ridiculous. You could even consider, like, a rook lift. Maybe. I mean, if we get to g4, though, I'm not really sure what we're doing from there. So maybe not, but okay. What else do we have? A6 is a little bit loose, but it's defended well for the time being. We could take here with the bishop. Although I don't think so. I don't think that's a great idea. No. I think this is probably the move. So let's play it. Knight d5. I can't see any other way to make progress here. Yeah, this looks good. This knight is tied down to this defense pretty severely. Bishop b3 looks natural. We keep a good amount of control over this knight infiltrating. We also keep an eye on d5. I think bishop b7 I will meet with rook to c1, applying more pressure to c6. If bishop b7, rook c1, rook c8... I have a few different options. I can play a move like queen to f3. Applying pressure, and just getting out of the way. This is shaping up to be a decent position here. I think this knight, it's performing an important duty right now, but I would still argue that it's a little bit misplaced. But it also has no way back into the game, because you can't come to c6 because I will just take you. So that puts black in a bit of a predicament, and his time is also ticking lower and lower. He's below 5 minutes, and we are at 8 minutes 50, which is pretty good news. I think this game is hopefully showing why I love the Panov Attack so much, and why I've been using it so much recently with really good success, because this is so testing. It's so testing for my opponent to try and fight against. And it goes against, like, all the typical Caro Kann lines. Like, you can't use all of the theory you've studied in the advanced variation, and in the classical, and in the alien gambit, or all those kinds of things. You just go completely away from that. Okay, bishop to e6. Alright, so he's holding down both of these squares. Really, this bishop is just a pawn. Now, there's a pretty cool move here that we could play, which is knight to g6. Forking the rook and the bishop. And if knight g6 my opponent takes, then his bishop hangs. Is it worth doing that? I don't know. I think we can just keep that in our back pocket for now, because I don't think it reaps any significant reward. Trying to see if there's anything better. Like, maybe we can go queen to e2. Preparing this, and if this, then we can take here with check. Maybe that's a better line. Rook f7 does work there, but it's very uncomfortable for black. If queen e2... My issue is, if I get knight to g6, my opponent can probably just play rook to e8. And then I don't really have a threat. So, yeah. No, let's just go rook c1. But we should be aware that knight g6 may exist in some of these lines. Okay, my opponent does this. I think I like queen e2. Not for the reasons that I mentioned before, but I think I like it. The reason being, we're hitting a6, which is only defended once now, because the bishop and the rook have vacated the defense. We also connect the rooks, because I'd much rather take here with a rook than take with the queen, because my rook just does a better job of controlling the file, because this queen, of course, can't challenge my rook. And we still maintain these ideas of knight to g6, except if takes, then we have queen takes, which is better, because it comes with check and a good amount of pressure on d5, and even b6 in some potential lines. My opponent keeps ticking lower on the clock as well. I think we're doing a good job of squeezing this position. We do have potential ideas of like f4, but I'm not sure what we're doing after that. Bishop to f4 could be a move at some point to turn our attention towards the king side, but it feels a little bit pointless for now. This knight, again, is still completely stuck. I mean, we have no good way to win it, because there's always a5 anyway. But the knight is stuck just defending the c6 square. And it does a good job of defending d5 in fairness, but I don't care that much about the d5 pawn, really. My attention is more so towards the king side. We also have some interesting ideas here that involve taking on f7, which I'm just realizing. Because if rook takes, we of course take the bishop. But the point is, if knight takes, bishop takes, then we can take this bishop. Now, this is actually really interesting. Okay, yeah, my opponent gets the bishop off the line. I was thinking I can maybe take first and then go for that, but my opponent moves his bishop out of the way, which is a smart decision. Still not simple, though. Still not simple. Okay. We could consider f4, but it feels unnecessary and a little bit forced. I don't think we have ideas of taking on f7 anymore, because the bishop just takes and I have nothing. We do have knight to g6 still, which does offer a bishop trade, and taking looks pretty bad. However, on knight to g6, rook to e8, we're not really doing anything all that useful with the knight. The knight's just kind of doing nothing. We could go queen to h5 just to apply general pressure. Okay. I think I should try and improve this bishop, because I feel like the rest of our pieces are very well placed, but this bishop not so much. I'd love it on b1, hitting this diagonal, but currently this knight is stopping it from doing anything. If I go to d1, I just hang a rook, obviously. What happens if I take the rook? That's a good question. Well, probably queen takes. Then do I have knight f7? I think there's bishop g3. Bishop g3. Oh, no, I have knight to h6? Maybe? Looks very dubious. These lines could work, though. These lines could work. But what needs to be in place? What needs to be in place for it to work? Well, the problem with take, and knight to f7 currently is the bishop takes on g3, and my knight doesn't have any targets. Right? That's the problem. Wait, maybe I can take immediately. Because then if this, then I have this. If I take and rook c1, then I can just take the queen. And that's winning. If I take and bishop takes, then I have rook c8 hitting the queen. And if queen takes bishop d6, I'm winning. I think this works. If taken rook takes, then I take. If there... Yeah. I think it works. I'm sure it works. Let's go for it. Knight f7. This is a bit of a wild move. A bit of a wild move. And there is a chance it backfires. But no, this is good. This is completely winning. I just take on c8. And your queen has to take. And then I win your bishop, except it's even worse because I'm hitting the rook and the knight. And yeah, currently I'm up a pawn, but it's worse than that. Oh no, maybe you have rook to e8 saving. Does that save the position? That might save the position. Sort of. I could just go queen d2 there. Applying pressure. Is there anything else? I have no checks. It's the issue. If take, then just take, and take is not enough. That's not enough. I should end up just up a pawn, to be honest, which is fine. Yeah, let's just do this. I think my opponent probably has to take and then move the knight. If knight to, let's say, rook take, queen take, knight d3. I think I have queen to c3. Probably. If take, then take, and we're good. However, in that line, there might be rook takes, queen takes, knight d3. If queen c3, then queen to f5, defending the knight, and also threatening f2. Bishop to g3. I suppose I'm preparing bishop to c2. Maybe. It should be winning, though, being up a pawn here. Also, I have the bishop pair. Okay, he does go for this line. But we also have other options. Now, we do have to stop queen to c1, because I will just get back rank mated if I allow queen c1. So, queen c3 is probably the best move, to be honest. Queen c3. Queen f5. I've also got to defend b2. So maybe queen d2. And then queen f5 doesn't come with a threat. It just defends. And then I have like bishop c2 probably. Bishop g6. I could just be chill and play a move like bishop g3. It's an option. Yeah, let's do that. Let's go queen d2. We're up a bit of time as well, and we are still up a pawn. I do have to be aware both my bishops are undefended currently, so I'd like to bring this bishop back ASAP and get it out of the way. This bishop is safer than the other bishop, so I'm not so concerned about it. I think queen f... Well, he could go bishop to g6, but then I'll just win this pawn. So that seems not good. And it also comes with check, so you know you can't go for a skewer because you have to deal with the check first. So queen f5 seems relatively forced. I don't see any other good moves in the position. I can't really deflect the queen away from the defense of the knight. g4, if takes, would come with check, so that doesn't work. Otherwise, it might be a good idea, but to be honest, after queen to e4, like the g-pawn is just very weak for no reason. So, oh, that's a move. It's a move. If here there is no queen e1 because I have queen to f1. Okay. If I take, he's going to take here. I can take on a6. If queen to b4, I can check and come back. That looks good to me. Yeah, there's no queen e1, which is the important part. But a6 just hangs. A6 is just hanging. So we're up 2 pawns now. And the d5 pawn is still weak. If I can secure a queen trade, then it's basically game over. With the queen still on the board, it makes it a little bit more difficult. But we should be better. We also have ideas of like queen c8 check, king h7, and bishop to c2. Or even like queen to f5. There's lots of tricks here because my king is exposed, sure, because the back rank is weak. But my opponent's king is very exposed as well. So we're in very good stead here. Very good stead here. And he's down to under a minute, which is fantastic news. b6 is still weak. d5 is still weak. Okay, that's the move. All right. And he's attacking this. Now I can give this check. King here. Check. bishop here. Not sure I'm in love with that. I'm going to start with this check regardless, because we now control c1. And I can always play a move like queen c3 just to defend everything. But I think a bishop trade is good for us. Here. Take. Ooh, I like this. Coming to e3. That looks really strong. Because we just hold everything together. Yeah, I like that. If g6... Okay, you can play that if you really want, but that just looks weakening. I suppose it's a move. Is that actually a good move? Because now this is a threat and you're still threatening this. I don't have queen c3 because of this. And I just lose. Wow. Okay. Could go g3. Just giving my king breathing room. I think I like that. g3, queen d4. Queen c7. g3, queen d4, queen c3. I think a bishop trade should be winning, but no, that's an interesting idea from my opponent, which I admittedly didn't miss. I think g3 is the move. I don't think I'm missing anything here. It's just uncomfortable. And yeah, I lose the d-pawn, which I didn't want to allow, but that's the way it goes. I suppose in the long run, I have a lot of my pawns on dark squares, which make them safer against my opponent's bishop, which is a pro. But yeah, queen d4. There's no checks after queen d4 because d1 is covered. Although b2 does still hang. And my opponent's pawns are all well defended. I think I have to go for a queen trade. I don't see any other good options. Because, like, queen d7, just king g7. And I achieve nothing. So I think queen c3. And I expect my opponent to try to decline the queen trade with a move like queen to g4. And maybe he can even try and invest in this pawn. That might be a good option for him. Queen g4. King g2. Maybe that walks into this and this, though. Which I don't want to allow. No, this is some stubborn defense from my opponent. I think a trade benefits us. I think we're winning if a trade happens. So I'd love that. Be interesting to see how I should have converted this. Maybe the immediate queen c3 or... Yeah, maybe the immediate queen c3 was better rather than including bishop c2, but we'll find out. Okay. I think this sets a nice trap. After d4, it looks like a double attack. But we have queen to c7. Okay, let's stop this pawn from moving. Keep a lot of pressure going. This check doesn't really do anything. My bishop is loose, but you can't attack it currently. b6 is hanging, although I don't want to allow queen e4 check. I could even try to infiltrate. Okay, he comes back. Cool. This is difficult. This is difficult. I think I know how to win this, though. Let's start with bishop c2. Applying pressure and getting the bishop out the way. I think I need to start pushing my queenside pawns to create a diversion. Okay, let's go b4. That's an interesting idea. Ooh. Oh no, it doesn't do anything though. It's purely artificial. It's completely artificial. I just go back and you have nothing. If you go for this, then sure, but I'll just stop that. Nah, let's just push. There's no threat. It looks scary, but yeah, there's actually no threat. If takes, I may even have queen to a7 as an interesting idea. And if takes, bishop to a4. Or then maybe you can push. Oh, that's a move. That's a move. Going for f1. Okay. I suppose I should block. I don't think I have a choice there. So the bishops come off the board. Let's take. I don't think I can go here. That seems risky. Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry. My recording just cut out. But I will show you the rest of the game. Don't worry, you didn't miss any spectacular commentary. In this position, I played the move a6, just advancing the pawn further down the board. And I have a very clear threat of something like queen to b3 and queen to b7, pinning the queen to the king and escorting the pawn. So my opponent played queen to a4, not letting my queen to the b5 square. Of course, I should not be taking this pawn, because this is just a complete draw. Because the pawns are on the same side of the board, I might be still up a pawn, but I have no actual advantage. My king will always be in a perpetual if I try to push. So I instead played queen to e2. Queen e2, intending, so let's say my opponent tries to push the pawn. I'll play queen e7 check, king g8, and I'll bring the pawn to a7. I can then deliver another check and promote. So my opponent, well, he first delivered a check on a1, and after king g2, went queen to a3, stopping my infiltration on the e7 square. Find the most easily winning move for white here. Queen b5. So obviously previously, in this position, we wanted to play queen b5, but my opponent was covering it. By doing this, we go queen to b5. Remember, all of these moves have to still be defending the a6 pawns. We can only operate on this diagonal. Now queen b5, we have two infiltration spots, which means there's no way for my opponent to stop me from infiltrating. If you try to move your king to the back rank, it doesn't help, because I can do something like queen b8 check, king moves, and something like pawn to a7. And the only chance that black has here is to try and go for some kind of perpetual. If I promote, is that perpetual? No. I have king h3, queen f5, here, here. Oh, my queen can come back to g3. But you get the point. My opponent can't really defend the position. He goes d4 trying to push, but of course I give a check. King goes to g8, I push to a7. And my opponent tries queen to f8, maintaining defense. I could play a move like queen to b7, just escorting the pawn, but there's an even more simple finish with queen to d5 check, and my opponent resigns, because the king is in check, and I am defending the a8 square at the same time. If you block, of course, I can just promote, and if you move the king, I can still just promote, and this is completely winning. Now, let's get into the actual analysis of the game. Again, very sorry about that. Hopefully, this shows you how good the Panov is, but let's see what the computer has to say. So, this is the exchange Caro Kann, and this is the Panov attack with c4. You might be asking, why can't black just take? You can, but bishop takes, and I have an isolated pawn, but my development is so quick, and black still needs more time to get his pieces out. So, knight f6, knight c3. My opponent goes e6, and we go knight to f3. Bishop b4, bishop g5. Not the best move, actually. Taking is apparently better, which I have to admit I don't fully understand. Sorry about that. I don't fully understand why the computer would want to go for this, so maybe some of you know. But bishop g5, castles, bishop to d3, just developing the pieces. The position is technically completely equal, but I would argue it's much easier for white to play. dc4, my opponent waits for my bishop to move before taking, so I have to waste another move. That's a very common idea in like the Slav, in the Panov, in the Queen's Gambit. Very common idea. Knight to c6, we castle. Again, the position is completely equal. a6, which I thought was a little bit off track. I go a4, which isn't the best move. Bishop b3 or bishop d3 seem to be better. But okay. a4, bishop back to e7, which is the best move. You're not really putting any significant pressure on this knight. I did consider the move knight e4 myself, but correctly, I evaluated bishop to e7 was only helping black, because trades help the side attacking the isolated pawn, because I simply have less pieces to defend the isolated pawn. So a4, bishop e7, rook e1, which is the best move. Knight d5, and we go bishop to g3, avoiding the trade of bishops. The computer likes bishop takes, which I... Really? You want this? Just wants to whack the knight on e5 and say that white is better, which is surprising, but okay. Bishop g3, knight c to b4. And here, yeah, knight to e5 is the best move. Just taking some space, setting up potential tactics in the future. b6 is played, which is a mistake because of knight takes d5, which is the only move to fight for any kind of advantage. ed5, if knight takes d5, then knight to c6, and I'm winning in some capacity. Because let's say queen e8, bishop takes, pawn takes, and knight takes. The e-file comes in clutch. So, ed5 is the only move. Here, okay, apparently bishop b3 was wrong. Bishop d3 was better. But I thought my opponent just took. Oh, the point is knight c6. That is gross. That is gross. And the best that black can do is apparently to go for this position, which I think is clearly better for white. A queen for a bishop and a rook. And if bishop d3, what's the best move then? Let's say bishop to e6, like in the game. Then I go bishop b1. And then, like I said in the game, when my bishop was on b3, I was like, I'd love it to be on b1. This is the way the engine finds to do that. But okay, I'm still better. Bishop e6, rook c1 is the best move. Rook c8, and queen to e2. Rook c3 is better, and this is a move I actually saw in the game. But I couldn't... Like, of course, if takes, then that is a trapped knight. But my opponent's not going to take. I didn't see the point after rook c3. Computer finds, yeah, it just wants to leave the rook there. I suppose it means neither of these pieces have to worry about defending the rook. But anyway, I go queen e2, and then bishop to d6. Knight f7 does work. Yeah. I was considering ideas of knight to g6, but they didn't seem to work. It was like rook c1, and then just rook e8, and my knight would have to move. So, knight f7 is the only move, and it is the best move. Black has many options here. If this, then of course I take on d8, so that's out of the question. If you take on c1, then I take on d8, so that's out of the question. You need to get rid of the knight. If rook takes, then queen e6. And of course, this is better for white. I'm up a pawn with a lot of pressure. So my opponent plays what I would probably say is the best try, with bishop f7. Rook c8, attacking the queen. Queen takes, and bishop takes d6. Now, I admittedly missed that rook to e8 was a move when I was calculating, but I'm still winning. Now, oh, there's a better move than what I played here. Try and find it. There's a better way to do this. It's bishop to e5, which seems counterintuitive because knight c6 applies a lot of pressure, but the computer just says go queen d2. And now there's no pressure on your back rank. If takes, then the d pawn is actually just really weak. So, okay, I went queen d2. Rook e1, queen e1, knight d3. Okay, queen d2 is the only move. So the problem with queen c3... What? Is actually queen c3 and knight c1? I saw this. What's wrong with this? Oh, does knight e2 check? Ah. And okay, only white can be better in this endgame, sure, because I have the bishop pair, but this is not amazing. Queen d2, however, avoids a queen trade, so that's interesting. Queen e6. Okay, queen d3 is the only move. Awesome. Queen d6 and queen takes a6. Sorry, queen d3 and queen takes a6. So we're up 2 pawns. Queen f4. Queen c8 is the only move. King h7. Here, bishop c2 is not the best. Better is queen c3, which is what I saw in the game. But what I had calculated was bishop c2, bishop to g6, take, and I think... No, it wasn't that. It was... I think just bringing the queen back. I think that's what I wanted to do. And basically just say the king is misplaced. No, what I saw during the game was this. This is what I saw during the game, actually. But apparently the computer's not a fan of it. But okay. I should have just gone queen c3. I went bishop c2. I missed the move g6. But I played the correct response. The only really good response, which is g3. I have to give up the pawn. Queen c3 is considered an inaccuracy because the computer wants to go for a trade, but of course this is winning for white, so practically it's not a move. Queen g4, bishop b3, bishop b6, queen d4, blocking the pawn. Queen e1, king g2. And this, to be honest, seems like a very smooth conversion, b4. And the problem is, if black does nothing, then I will just create... Well, I might throw in bishop d3, but like I'll create a passer on the a file, and we saw how that worked out during the game, but with this setup as well, that's going to be basically impossible to stop, especially with how weak d5 is and g6 is, and the 7th rank in general. So my opponent goes for an attack, but there's actually just nothing. Bishop b5. Wait, what? Oh, there's an even better move here, which I missed. Bishop g6, king g6, and queen to b6. That's even better. I can also retreat the queen, but that's very passive. So I went bishop d3, take, ba5, ba5, and of course I showed you the position. Well, I showed you the analysis from this position onwards. Basically, if I infiltrate the 7th rank, the game is over, and that's exactly what we do after some shuffling, and my opponent resigns in this position, because I will promote, and there's nothing you can do about it. I hope you guys enjoyed this game. I hope it inspires some of you to try the Panov Attack out for yourselves. If you want to see another video where I use the Panov Attack to great effect to beat the Caro Kann, check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.